There was a chap here, actually, a young teenager, a 14-year-old. He was one of the youngest, I think, to have a life sentence, I think, to be tried as an adult for hate crimes and various other things. But he wrote these very detailed diaries where he basically, he'd obviously read Nietzsche, but he believed that he was literally above the law. Yes, I mean, the police could come and arrest him and throw him in prison, but ultimately he was above all that, and that he could do and behave exactly as he wanted. And he actually confessed to enjoying watching the suffering of others. He was a confessed sadist, and his kind of philosophy of life is that eventually that would overcome. That he would somehow overcome those constraints, those moral constraints. He was 14, not even a mature individual.
Welcome to We Need to Talk, where we try to figure out how to find fulfillment in life and reduce dissatisfaction. Listen to this full episode if you'd like to hear how science is in some sense the new religion, where you have a few technocrats, scientists, which can be compared to the high priests of medieval times, and where the lay citizens would take the words and advice of the high priests or the scientists as gospel. And you'd have this dynamic of asymmetric information and unevenly distributed power between the lay citizens and these few technocrats, scientists, or back then high priests. Furthermore, we discuss how the suppression of the moral conscience, or maybe the understanding of the concept of God in modern people, has led individuals to develop and nurture this arrogance, this hubris of believing one is able to act as one likes without needing to bear the responsibility of one's behavior. And that has some dire, dark consequences for individuals and for society as a whole, let's say. So enjoy the episode and don't forget to subscribe. Let's go.
But I think what's happened now is that science and technology has become the new religion. So we just fail to question it. So you have specialists, you have scientists, you have people in Silicon Valley coming out with views or theories or whatever, and we take it as gospel because so much of it is anathema to us. I mean, I don't know if someone was to ask me, how does mobile technology work? I wouldn't have a clue. To me, it's a miracle, just like manna is from heaven. So, the common man has been, in a way, I think, isolated really from really actually what drives technology and science. What is it behind it? And so we've put our belief, our faith, our trust in a bunch of scientists, in a bunch of people, a small minority who are now the high priests, who would have been the high priests in the 14th century and certainly the high priests in the 19th century. We have now given them the same respect that those people would have given their local priest back in 300 years ago. So there's a lot of hypocrisy, I think. People liberally come out and say things like, well, I don't believe in religion, I believe in science. But actually, what's the difference between saying, well, actually, I don't really believe in science, I believe in religion? One has become the other. One has become the other. And the irony with so many of these, certainly with Darwin, is that at the end of the day, it was a theory of evolution. It was never a fact of evolution. It was a theory of evolution. And he died denying his own theory. He died a confirmed Christian. He wasn't a dedicated creationist, but he died a confirmed Christian. And this, and we take his word as gospel. I think there's a lot of two-faced hypocrisy about religion and about technology and about science. We've created our own religion through science and technology. You only need to look at the advances in modern technology. 500 years ago, people would have said it was wizardry. What's going on now? People would have said, "Wow, I mean that's magic. Someone's waved a wand, and therefore you can talk to someone on the other side of the world." But I think we've just put our hands, our lives and destinies in the hands of a small bunch of people, technocrats, and they've become the high priests.
And how do you forecast the future then based on the status quo? I mean, are you more optimistic or pessimistic?
No, I'm actually quite pessimistic. I mean, as a person, I'm an optimist, very much so. But I do think there's a worrying dependency, I think, on technology, and I do see us moving into a kind of world where our lives will be totally governed by technology. Money will cease to exist very soon, and I think chipping will come in. We'll be chipped in some way. I think artificial intelligence probably will be. I think probably human DNA and artificial intelligence will be probably fused in some way. I think we will become a sort of. This is very utopian, or dystopian, but I think we are moving into a world where I think technology is going to basically rule our lives. And the other thing, the feeling I get is that we'll be herded more and more into huge metropolises, and access to the country, access to the will be for an elite, a very small elite. So I see it as quite Orwellian, actually. Maybe not in the next 10 years, but certainly perhaps in the latter part of your life. I don't know. Certainly, maybe in the next 50 years, I can see us gradually moving into something that's very Orwellian. You know, you only have to see the way that the world has acquiesced with COVID. I'm not saying that the measures that we've been advised to take have not been positive, but we've acquiesced very easily. In other words, the leaders of the world have been able to manipulate us for good. I'll give you that, very, very easily. Now, what does it take for a few despot dictators to get in and to use something like an epidemic as an excuse for hurting us in some way, chipping us, whatever, so I can see there are dangers that we need to look out for.
I can understand your sort of the forecast of a potential dystopia. However, I think there is a natural function to restabilize what is corrupting. So
I hope so. Yes. Yeah, I agree. I think the pendulum will swing back.
Yeah.
But in a way, this is the perfect opportunity. I think COVID has given us the opportunity to rewind, actually, and to look, or maybe rewind or fast forward, and to really evaluate what sort of life we want to have, what sort of community, what sort of existence. But at the end of the day, is there really the will, for example, to obliterate poverty? Is there a real will to cancel third world debt? Is there a real will to deal with the environment? Much as we talk about these things, unfortunately, greed gets in the way so often. Greed in the hands of a tiny minority who will just pursue their own agenda. I mean, we could have cancelled poverty decades ago if we'd had the will in the West. Quite easily. We could have got rid of or prevented droughts, famines, wars, whatever, if there'd been the real will. But there isn't, I don't think. And I'm an optimist.
But I feel like that the problem with greed amongst a few powerful individuals, I think, can be mediated by changing the individual here. So, like, I think the core of all problems in, let's say, our society lies within the individual. If you fix the individual, you fix the root, you fix the rest of the tree. And that idea of greed, all it takes is for these people, I think, maybe a bit more, but all it takes in some sense is just to make these individuals aware that the marginal or the added wealth that they could accumulate really isn't going to bring them much, or that, like, I think they are dissociated. They are thinking something that is not in tune and not in sync with what their body actually desires.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you go back to, I mean, what you mentioned there is the core of what Jesus Christ spoke about, which is change can only happen in the human heart. Change cannot be forced by politics. Change happens in the human heart. It's when an individual realizes his or her ways. I'm not talking about sin. I'm talking about that one has to come to a level of enlightenment oneself to realize that we are living in a community. We're not solely responsible for ourselves. We're responsible for those around us. But I do think that though probably the majority of us have those views, those communal values, there will always be some who won't share those, who are driven fundamentally by greed. Call them sociopaths, call them psychopaths, whatever. And my view of them is not so optimistic. My view of them is nothing will change them, because they will only ever think of themselves. That's my personal view. I think the majority of us can be changed, can be persuaded, can be instructed, but there will always be one or two who just are beyond the pale.
But I also think that balance, or that balance between opposites, in that you have, let's say, altruists, and on the other side, psychopaths or sociopaths, you need that balance. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, the yin yang, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, exactly. Life is a constant equation of flux and balance, and the pendulum swinging from one direction to another. And in a way, that's what makes life varied and interesting, isn't it? Is that we're not all the same. We don't all think the same, but we are products of our own personal experience, our environment, our nurture. And you take someone who's maybe from our background, we've had fairly balanced, I would say, upbringings, but there's plenty of people in the world who haven't. The upbringings have been brutal. So how do you address the balance in their lives? I don't know. Because I think they become almost destined to wreak their brutality on others. That's it's, and of course, how many are there of us on the planet?
A lot, like 7.8.
You got a lot of hearts and minds to change, I think.
Yeah, that's true. But I'd like to hear your perspective on this. Actually, I think, based on what you just said, the question that jumps to mind is, what's the purpose of suffering? Why are these individuals who have a contorted raising of, laced with challenge, brutality, and suffering? Why? And I don't have the answer, but I think suffering is a necessary variable to experience and feel the meaning of life, because it is precisely the existence of, whether you want to call it love, whether you want to call it joy, in the face of suffering. It is precisely that unification that gives the meaning of life. Because if there was only joy and love, it would not just feel, one-sided and utopian, but it is that realization where you think, okay, despite the suffering, I have been able to transcend and find a light in life.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, you can see it on a micro version, can't you? I mean, you could say, if you had endless holidays, would you take them for granted? I think you enjoy your holidays because you worked hard. There's always a balance, isn't there? And that's not talking about suffering. That's just balance. So, but I think suffering is part of the fact that we, as beings, we have free choice. Some suffering is not of our own making, but also the choices we make in life can lead to all kinds of complications. But we are beings with free choice, and part, I think, of the responsibility of free choice is that we are open to being battered by life, and that can create suffering. If we were automatons or zombies, we probably wouldn't suffer, but then what would our existence really be? And our God, call him whatever, call him Allah, or call him Jesus Christ, or call him Buddha, or whatever. I believe the greatest gift is that human beings have been given free will. We decide our own paths, and and a lot of I would say a lot of our own suffering comes from perhaps choosing the wrong path, or not getting back on the right path. Obviously there's ex deus machina suffering. You could be involved in an earthquake, which is nothing to do with your choice, or an arbitrary car accident. But I think a lot of emotional suffering is a result of poor choices. But we are free will. We are free human beings with free will. We have choices. We make decisions. We're not perfect. We make wrong decisions. But also that's what the rich pageantry of life is that we actually learn from our failings. We become stronger. We learn from our suffering. We become stronger. Or if it does break us, perhaps others can learn from that. Suffering isn't relative. Suffering is relative. It's not quantitative. Your own suffering, others may say, well, that's not as bad as someone else's has, but it's very personal, isn't it? Suffering. You can only really quantify it in your own terms. And some people have a higher threshold for it than others. But I do think exactly what you said. It's about balance. If we didn't suffer, could we really enjoy life? I'm not sure we could. In the same way as if we didn't work, could we really enjoy holidays? Or would it just be an endless, bland existence of free time? So yeah, I think everything is in balance. Everything is in flux. Everything in moderation. I think excess can lead to problems. Excess of anything, excess of wealth, excess of time, excess of anything can lead to problems. Everything is in a balance. Right. That's harmony, isn't it? That's the word harmony is exactly that.
I have so many ideas I want to ask you right now. First of all, are you familiar with? You teach English literature also, or?
So that's mainly what I do teach. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you're familiar with? Okay, this is not English literature, but the Brothers Karamazov.
Oh yes, funnily enough, I was just talking to someone the other day about Dostoevsky because they were reading Crime and Punishment, which I personally think is the greatest novel ever written. But and that, funny enough, that deals with the notion of good and evil. Funny enough, yes, the Brothers Karamazov is a wonderful book. Yeah,
because when you were talking about free will, what came to my mind is the Grand Inquisitor.
Yes,
the chapter. For everybody listening, the Brothers Karamazov, go and read it. It's a long read, but it's worth it. But that chapter, the Grand Inquisitor, where the Inquisitor wants to trial or execute the second coming of Jesus because he thinks he disapproves of the freedom Jesus gave to humanity, and the Grand Inquisitor thinks Jesus could have prevented the suffering by accepting the temptations of the devil to turn the stones into bread.
The Inquisitor really is a metaphor for Satan, isn't he? Really.
Yes, but I also think he's a metaphor for modern day scientific nihilists.
Yeah.
Also.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, yeah. Well, you talk about, in a way, I think what you're saying applies probably more to Crime and Punishment, in that here we have a character who is Nietzsche's man, Superman. He believes he's above the law. He believes he's above the constraints of morality, and he wants to therefore commit the perfect crime and get away with it. And we've seen throughout history, haven't we, certain people have taken that into their hands and decided, no, I'm above this. I'm above this, and I will prove it. Whether it's Joseph Stalin or Adolf Hitler or Mao Zedong, they've actually come to a point in their life where they've made a decision. I'm not going to be constrained by by the mores and morality of society. I'm going to step above it. I'm going to superimpose my will against it.
Mm.
But history will tell us those people in the end. I'm sorry, but they're overcome, aren't they? Eventually, they
And
have their time. They have their time, but
yeah.
they're not immortal.
Right. And I think that arrogant mindset of being above the, let's just call it the law, is still present on a, let's say, a smaller scale with modern day individuals who don't think that this concept of God exists. It's just, I mean, they don't murder each other, let's say, or at least some don't, or a lot don't, thankfully, but they still think there's no price to my actions, or there's no, I don't really need to
Absolutely.
bear responsibility.
Absolutely. Yes, yeah. There was a chap here, actually, a young teenager, a 14-year-old. He was one of the youngest, I think, to have a life sentence, I think, to be tried as an adult for hate crimes and various other things. But he wrote these very detailed diaries where he basically, he'd obviously read Nietzsche, but he believed that he was literally above the law. Yes, I mean, the police could come and arrest him, throw him in prison, but ultimately he was above all that, and that he could do and behave exactly as he wanted. And he actually confessed to enjoying watching the suffering of others. He was a confessed sadist. And his kind of philosophy of life is that eventually that would overcome, that he would somehow overcome those moral constraints. He was 14, not even a mature individual. So there are those seeds, aren't there, of destructiveness in our minds.
But do you think, when you just said that, I'm not sure what this 14-year-old, what kind of crimes he committed, but the action of writing a diary where he explains his principles, let's say, reminds me of the Columbine killers. I know.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
didn't read the diaries myself, I need to confess that, but I've heard others talk about the diaries, and it's basically a manifesto of why they are entitled to wreak havoc, or why, well, it's an argumentation for why humanity deserves to perish, or does not deserve
Absolutely.
to exist.
Yeah. In fact, the same guy, I can't remember his name, that Norwegian chap who
Yeah.
murdered all those children at the camp, he shared similar views. And it was almost as if, well, they can come and arrest me, they can throw me in prison, but my mind's beyond all that. My mind's free of all that. And I will never consent to their laws or principles. To him, he had a destiny. He felt that the hatred in his life was larger than the love in his life. That's for sure. He was almost worshipping that sadistic hatred that was in his life. I mean, it's deeply worrying, isn't it? How someone can emerge as a human being with those feelings.
Yes, but I think that's, I mean, just it's the same thing, but that's a manifestation of an absent light, or it's an absent,
Yeah.
if you want to call it God, whatever, really.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So tell me, what I'm going to throw this back onto you. So what are you hoping that these talks? I mean, you say let's talk. That's the almost the catchphrase of your series of videos. But what are you hoping to achieve with all this?